Who is the Sun King explores the relationships between science, humankind, and one man's struggle with urban psychosis. Through interviews conducted during medically induced regression, Sol Liddens talks about the intelligence that conceived the ideas and reveals who developed the piece of equipment that took him through and around time. Who is the Sun King? By Edward C. Harwell. Sol Liddens Journal. Recorded to audio during psychognosis.
Let's just say I wasn't in the best flower of mental health. I'd snatched up any loose plastic cups and chewed the contents down on the way to the room. The slightest misunderstanding with anyone might have caused me to either flake out or go mad. The porter seemed to sense this and wheeled me very carefully along the corridors, where I caught a glimpse of myself in a mirror. Well, with the way I was dressed, it should have taken extreme physical force to get me anywhere. But with the nurse's help, I was able to limp aboard the plinth without any problem. There was the usual wave of green light from the monitor, making me slightly paranoid, but I was so far beyond normal fatigue by then, I wouldn't have cared if I was stark ruddy naked clutching a rose between my teeth. I was beginning to feel nicely adjusted to the idea of a twilight sleep. Dr. Bethlehem rested a hand on my arm. This is the best place for you to be heard in private. To help you remember the facts, Nurse Looker is going to give you a nice measure of tryptolin. Okay, no problem, I thought. Then he came at me with a needle. Can you lay right back for me, Sol? That's fine. And could you roll up your sleeve for me? Perfect. Right here, small pinch. Then he leaned over and spoke calmly into my ear. You may want to, very slowly, start counting backwards from 10. And as you begin to feel the warmth rising inside of you, just relax and talk freely about any subject that drifts into your mind. Just say things as you see them, Sol. I can honestly say I didn't feel a thing, just Nurse Looker's hand on mine and her words. Do you know where you are, Sol? I tried to speak but couldn't form the words. My connection with everything in the room had gone. I looked around at my new environment and tried to absorb everything. I was surrounded by all of these machines and structures, things like I'd never seen before, rotating and ticking and clicking. All of a sudden I was like a chimpanzee in a computer lab, with a wide rainbow of raw data exploding through me. Gradually, I began to feel time and space falling away, while inside of me grew an overwhelming compulsion to express the wonders that I'd seen. The next moment, I was back in Paris. In spite of all that had gone on before, and all that's happened since, I still remember Paris as a profound experience. It was the same cauldron of dark emotions that stirred within me on the way down. Another 9-day wonder. Bellatrix was playing Marie Antoinette in a burlesque routine at the Moulin Rouge. I was on the front row, and of course there was another. There usually was. A young, handsome rival, easily supplanted, she said, by the gift I kept in my pocket, and the promise of where it might take us. After the show, I soon slipped past the other fellow, and we stepped outside into the full moonlight, and the sodium flash of a cameraman's lamp. It cast us into two long grey silhouettes that we can-canned across the moist cobbles. We worked those shadows through the city streets, pointing, laughing, playing chase along the Champs-Élysées. How could I forget the black line of her stockings, the velvet ribbon, the out-of-time panda of my feet following hers around the steps, and of course, my slip and trip at the top of the tower. Well, I was totally carried away. I unwrapped my song and sang it to her. You wax and you wane, and you dance in a naked flame. You're ringing my bell. From the top of the tower I fell, and God knows and more, you're what the night is for. She wasn't that taken, too busy watching the pretty lights twinkling all around us. But when all else fails, there's always the spooning of the pollen tincture. That worked a treat. The union of fine silver and the sweet aroma of the balsam as it bubbled and brewed in the flame. The parallax of stars as we began to spin around the cradle, hand in hand, until it generated one of those pantaloon and corset ripping sessions that culminates in two satisfied sighs. Afterwards, as we were going through the heavens like you're supposed to do, there was so much starlight I found myself explaining the signs of the zodiac to her. When I came to Arachnid the 13th, All she could mumble were half-bitten words about the brightness of the fiery reds and the lime greens, the phosphorus yellows of the galaxies as they hung in a framework against the sky. It caused a kind of syndrome to come over her. She became so tremendously excited again that when she smiled, those nocturnal eyes of hers welled up like saucers of iodine. And it was at the height of this phenomenon that my scarlet woman invited me to take a turn with her in the further scrutiny of a large mauve patch. Looking through the telescope, I saw a large circle of the deepest blue and a big round purple planet swimming around at its centre. It seemed so close, so bright and wide, standing perfectly still and faintly crossed with wide stripes. It was as if it quivered and grew larger and smaller, advancing and receding across the millions of miles of silent space. I didn't step away from the telescope until my mind was completely full and Jupiter was in the room. Then I closed my eyes and imagined my dreams illuminated in the rune pools of Nostradamus and painted in the sad silent seas on the star maps of Copernicus. When I looked again, all of the planets had linked together like a magnificent atomic puzzle, and we could have travelled to every one of them, the way the tall ships go, when it was just 22 English miles and 2 days to London. Well, how the times have changed. I'd returned from Paris via London to meet him, and as we were coming out of a nightclub, a little play-worn, a photographer jumped out from a dark alley on St Martin's Lane. I knew they'd pay a fortune for a picture of him and his so-called prodigy. Fortunately, we outran them. "Why give them the pleasure?" he said. "I can imagine the headlines. Transient star spotted in a girly bar after his stint at the Royal Albert Hall." That would have been enough to set the bloodhounds on our trail. His name suddenly yelled across Leicester Square, the chance photograph that set off a chain reaction of events, landing us on the front pages again. The private box had provided us with some breathing space away from the media microscope, an attack from a pro-Catholic vigilante, and the journalists who seemed to follow us everywhere. In the shadows of the Albert Hall, his demeanour had been that of Mr. Ordinary, a chap who worked his daily round like everyone else, and neither courted nor expected any particular attention. But he was always ready for it, with those innocent grey eyes, automatic coy smile, the top-hole compliments, and those big warm boxer's mitts, paws of a lion that always seemed ready to punch or stroke. With his fluffy Highland Terrier barking its head off on the back seat, we drove in his black silver shadow with a licence plate TRU1 to Hyacinth House in Bloomsbury, a white painted villa with a tall window at the back that overlooked the museum. We talked for 6 hours straight in the library, usual blokey stuff, how at 17 he'd been a direct organiser of the Junior Vintage Car Association. At 19 he'd designed a machine gun which had been adopted by the Ministry of Defence. Apparently, at its first test, it killed 31 insurgents with a single burst. At 23 he was lost in action, pursued by enemy jet planes while flying over the Pacific Ocean, with important tobacco supplies. Having weighted his body with tins of the stuff, he leapt out of a glider into deep water, pinstripes and all. Of course he lived to tell the tale, which is impossible to contemplate without feeling respectful. His other recreation was an hour spent in the gym each morning, and his collection of fantastically complicated watches. Since he'd taken a vow of celibacy for the job he was doing, he spent the other 23 hours of the day in devotion to his duty. His favourite subjects of conversation by a long chalk was about forming unbreakable business triangles that seemed to widen along with his personality. I remember him mentioning Hugo Palmer and architect's paraphernalia. At that point I think I stopped trying to understand what he was talking about. Whatever it was, you could be sure that it was all based upon a fluffy cloud somewhere. As I watched the steely face with the jaws moving rapidly up and down, I had a curious feeling that it wasn't a real person, but some kind of dummy. What I mean is that it wasn't his mind that was speaking. With a puerile smile on his face, I could only think that it was the pleasure centre behind his eyes that was doing all the talking. The stuff that was coming out of his mouth consisted of words. It was more like a noise uttered in unconsciousness, like the words of a sleepwalker in the mists of a pleasant dream, full of beautiful vagueness and useless shades of meaning. His mocking eyes began roving over my face. "I know you," the eyes seemed to say. "I see through you." Finally he spoke. "Don't they have razor blades in Paris?" I couldn't find any, I said, with a sort of guilty haste. I bet you didn't even look. Oh, yes, I did, I said. I tried all over the place. Was she beautiful? He asked, still with the same soppy smile on his face. I bet she was. He knows me very well. He had plenty of razors. He was hoarding them up. He reached forward, opened a drawer and pulled out a little white box of Wilkinson swords. After clapping them on the table, he pulled the cork back out of the gin bottle, and while still searching my face closely as he was speaking, he poured the gin into 2 mugs. Sometimes it's buttons missing, other times it's shoelaces. Fix up, look sharp, old girl, you know the dance. I took up my mug of gin, paused for a second to collect my nerve, and gulped the oily stuff down. He leaned over the table and launched into another stream of posh babble. Once I'd winked the tears from my eyes, I tuned in again, my range of consciousness narrowing with every word. It's merely a matter of self-discipline, old girl. While his muscular throat went about glugging down the gin, his mouth went on with a clucking. I know, because you told me. There was someone else, wasn't there? Someone you were attached to. Yes, there was, I said. Did she hurt you really bad? I guess she did, I said. And you were upset and angry. Lots of emotions. He let out a long, deep sigh and put down his mug. In view of ordinary beings, human life must have attachments, must have anger, must have ignorance. It must have these things. How can there be life in this world without attachment? It's not possible. It's not in some people's range of experience to have a life without attachments. The attachment that functions not to awaken, but to obscure the mind. Instead of bringing freedom, instead of bringing the mind freedom, it clings to the happiness of this. He looked around the room at the stuffed animals and brass ornaments. The comforts of this life. And because of that attachment, that grasping, that clinging, there's no real happiness. We can see with strong grasping, we're not really happy. The stronger the feeling, the less happy we are. There's no realisation in our hearts, no inner peace in our lives. The stronger the grasping mind is, the more suffering there is. Then, when we don't get what we want, or some disturbance happens with the object we cling on to, such as when a relationship dies, there's so much suffering. The next thing he said made my heart jump. You suffered, didn't you, Sol? Yes, I did, I said. I had to agree with him. He's usually right. You lived with her for a couple of years, didn't you? 2.5 years. 2.5 years, then she went away. She did, and it was all my fault. Whatever. She went away, and there was nobody else for you? Nobody. There was no refuge, nobody else in London to turn to? Nobody in the world, really, just lots of heartache and trouble. Nobody else in the world, only this woman, he said, with his grey eyes peering straight through me. But you know that since the world began, there's never been a person who's stayed permanently. Any intelligent person will understand this. Everyone knows that people can't live forever. There hasn't been a person in the world who's lived forever since the Big Bang. Nobody in America, nobody in Africa, nobody in Tibet, nowhere. And so the girl left. Yes, she did. Was it suddenly or gradually? Suddenly. So there was absolutely no one to rely on. No one. And soon after you died. Yes. Just as I thought, happens all the time, especially in London. Anything that is born into this world must die, even plants. Nothing can stay forever. After meeting, there must be parting. So there's no answer, I asked. Oh yes, there's an answer. There's a remedy for everything. So what is it? I asked him. It's simple. Stay out of this world. Pretty soon you'll want to disappear again anyway. It's written all over your face. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, actually. The staying out of this world part. You know, the travelling and the terrible dread I feel. Dread? How do you mean? I couldn't help thinking that the craft had a false spirit behind it. That the fellowship would be considered, shall we say, counterfeit in the eyes of everything good. So I put the question to him. Can I ask you something? Of course. Ask me absolutely anything you like. Is the practice connected to the occult? All of a sudden, an angelic smile came over his face, and with carefully measured words of tone and clarity, he began to resell the idea to me. Firstly, I prefer to call it a profession. Absolutely no, I can say categorically no. What about the covenant I made? You do know I'm a Roman Catholic, don't you? Non-practising, but I'm still paying my subs for the family. I know, he said with a wry smile. Bit of travel insurance. While my finger traced a pattern around the surface of the gin, he pulled a large black book from the shelf. When he opened it, I was immediately set about by that subtle odour of vintage cardboard and stale leaves that pervades the interiors of every old library in London. And in a strange way, the others that spring to mind often have a shadowy figure in an overcoat and a bowler hat thumbing over a collection of old Bibles, hoping to find a lost gospel. He began tearing through the pages like a wild missionary man. Here we are, you see here. There's no comma in the definitive Latin text of Canon 2335. It's all here in black and white. As his finger traced through the paragraphs of ancient script, I had a vision of old churches, a reminder of Sunday masses, complete with flickering cream candles. He began reading from a newspaper clipping pressed between the pages. It's not clear whether anyone concerned has been excommunicated or only those whose particular group has plotted against the Vatican. And so, he said, closing the book, a Catholic who joins us is excommunicated only if their actions are known to be hostile to the Church. And so, he said again, slamming the book contentedly, you and me are history in the making, old girl. The sad story that began in 1738 will have a happy ending. He thumped the book on the table, knocked back the gin, and stared at me through a happy grin. When he told me how the stars were helping him, I got a feeling that the gin was working its magic. He went on about his love of the stars, not the ones that fill the night sky, but the past luminaries that he mirrored to fund the purchase of the hardware that he gave to the brothers of his society. I was glad enough that he told me, although a little late I thought, about his talent for impersonation, his forays into the forgery of letters and autographs of famous people, among them Winston Churchill, William Shakespeare and Marilyn Monroe. He confessed that over many years he had composed over 500 letters, using a variety of ancient typewriters for added authenticity. He sold the letters to dealers at such knockdown prices that they never bothered to check their provenance. With an uncanny knack of getting to the heart of those he copied, and a musical ear for literary mannerisms, the imitations were often better than the originals. Beautiful fabrications, most of them scribed to personalised paper, others signed and sealed with hot wax melted over red ribbon. And that wasn't all. He also dealt in ancient illustrations. He created them on tawny parchment peeled from greaseproof paper that he kept in a walk-in humidor. His ability as a forger was so fine that 3 of his yellow fakes had somehow found their way into the Smithsonian Museum. For him that was a terrific hoot, adding that all of the epigrams were fun, nobody got hurt, and everybody made money. His most potent deal, he claimed, had been the one made with CERN, the European Centre for Nuclear Research. The potential benefits of his low-profile donations to those people seemed endless. In exchange for a document that he claimed was the blueprint for a machine to end all wars, Albert Einstein's Omega machine, his society members received back scientific training and used equipment. He was so good at selling that for all they cared, Providence might have been the capital of Bloomsbury. Some might have called it inherent talent. To me, his whittling matched forgery and theft. With the labyrinth of London, the fatherly advice, and all the creaking camaraderie oiled by the drink, I was exhausted. The man had completely worn me down. All of it deliberate, of course. There was further preparation. After the Paris trip, I was on board, so to speak, and after divesting me of all metal objects, he began my initiation by slipping into the role of honest burgher and asking me to remove all of my outer clothing until I was standing in just my socks, my left shoe, trousers and shirt. What a twerp I felt when he stepped right up close to me. I could feel his breath on the inside of my collar. When he unbuttoned my shirt to reveal my left nipple, most important, he said, I think I went slightly red. My right sleeve was rolled up to reveal my elbow and my left trouser leg was rolled up above the knee. Then he placed a slipper on my unshod foot. Had I not been slightly drunk, the next part would have folded me completely. It was a hangman's noose, placed around my neck, with the end of the rope hanging down behind me. Feeling like an abused farmyard animal, I was led to a door, on which he knocked, twice. I could hear the inner guard shuffle and step, Then, from behind me, he said, "Brother Junior Officer, there is a report." After several ritual responses, the inner guard opened the door and asked, "Whom have you there?" His reply came in a solemn tone, "Saul Liddens, a poor candidate in a state of darkness." Under the blindfold I could see the sword, could feel its cold tip rested on my nipple. "A poor candidate in a state of darkness," he said. "He's been well and worthily recommended, regularly proposed and approved in open bungalow. He comes of his own free will and accord, properly prepared and humbly solicited to be admitted to the mysteries and privileges of the craft." After half an hour standing with my heels together, making vows under a canopy of candlelight, I was one of them. In view of my trip to Paris, I had to believe in the reality of it all. It's just that the covenant didn't sound very scientific. In fact, it went on and on like a scene from a pirate movie. This covenant is for one person only. By entering into it, you solemnly promise that you will not write these secrets, indict, carve, mark, engrave, or cause them to be done so by others. If in your power to prevent it, or anything movable or immovable under the canopy of heaven, whereby or whereon any letter, character or figure, or the least trace of a letter, character or figure, may become legible, or intelligible to the brotherhood, or anyone in the world, so that the secret arts and hidden mysteries may improperly become known through your unworthiness, these several points you solemnly swear to observe, without evasion, equivocation, or mental reservation of any kind, under no less a penalty, on the violation of any of them, than that of having your throat cut across, your tongue torn out by the root, and buried in the sand of the sea at the lower water mark, or a cable's length from the shore, where the tide regularly ebbs and flows twice in 24 hours, or the more effective punishment of being branded as a wilfully perjured individual, void of all moral worth and totally unfit to be received into the worshipful bungalow, or any other society of humans who prize honour above external advantages of rank and fortune. So help you God, and keep you steadfast in this your great and solemn obligation of an entered apprentice of the craft. As the instrument of your new office, you will wield a fiery sword like a comet. Let me put it this way. When they were all together, there was no way of knowing whose version of things would be finally adopted. Obviously, he felt a profound conviction that it would be his version. Now you're beginning to get the idea of my moral dilemma. I didn't trust any of it. I came to a conclusion that once any crimes of forgery or fraud had been forgotten, he would exist just as authentically and upon similar evidence as the Prophet Muhammad or Jesus Christ. So what the hell, I thought, just get on with it. Casting my mind back to the chandeliers, the yellow-tinged walls and the dirt under his fingernails, I knew very well either way that if I were to disrespect him, he'd crucify me. It's crazy when I think about it. He'd been unimagined the previous year, and all of a sudden I had this scientific force in my life, a secret Grand Master. I suppose I should tell you how it all started. It's only complicated when they talk about it on the TV. You don't really need a degree in astrophysics to understand it. Eternity, that is. Once you accept there are an infinite number of universes, you agree that the possibilities out there in space go on forever. And if there's an infinite number of possibilities, anything is possible, no matter how slim the odds. That means that somewhere out there in the blueness of forever, there's another universe just like ours. And whirling around inside that one, lots of stars which are just like our sun, with other planets going around them, just like ours. And by an incredible series of coincidences, one of them has developed in virtue the same way as our own Earth, right down to the tiniest detail. Many times I've wondered just how much there was to know. Many became a number that continued to grow until I asked myself, what if there are extraterrestrial life forms living on these other Earths? And if there are things out there in the vast darkness of infinity, are they intelligent? Are they friendly? Do they eat, sleep, gamble, steal and drink? Do they love? Do they pray to a god? And of course, what do they look like? Here in this ocean of ours, there are fish that you could easily mistake for patches of sand or pieces of coral, until one of them skips right out from under your nose. Astrobiologists have told us that life doesn't have to consist of bipeds that move and breathe, that smoke their cigarettes like we do, that the universe is a gigantic bell jar of possibility, where everything has the chance and the right to happen. So I never had any cut and dry theories regarding just how other life should look. I just had this feeling that one day life would surprise us, that someday an unfamiliar civilization would stop by to meet us, or we might accidentally bump into ET on some quiet back corridor in space. Being interested in science, I believed in the power of the eye in the sky and the starman, and a myth, the story about the man with the name Pax, who loved and prayed and lost his lover in space, so set off to the end of our universe to try and find her. In the late 21st century, the most powerful planet hunter was named after Pax. It set off from the Cape with its own giant eyeglass seeking new worlds and life beyond our bubble. The challenge? To find planets that orbited stars similar to our Sun. These planets would ideally be about the third or fourth rock from their host star, orbiting once every 300 days or so, and floating around in a region without too much steam and without too much ice. That perfect spot we call the Goldilocks region. We are told that scientists have never discovered an organism capable of surviving without water, so Pax, guided by man's priority quest to find wet planets, began by taking a small snapshot in the Cygnus region of our own Milky Way. Suddenly, we were watching a million new suns. On the 5th of December, by photographing planets that blocked out the light from their host star, in the same way that a moth blocks out light from a candle, Pax found the first wet candidate, a planet that completed an orbit of a G-type star once every 289 days. The temperature on this planet was similar to that of our own Earth, but it was 2.5 times bigger, more like a Jupiter or Neptune. Since the water was no different to ours, and the gravity was about the same, Pax turned its telescope closer to the planet's surface and peered through the dense clouded gas. What we saw was a whole ecosystem living below the ocean. It was certainly a planet covered in water, but devoid of any solid ocean floor, a pearl without a home, a planet in all but substance, a water world set adrift in an empty sky. During the first 6 weeks of Pax's voyage, 7 new planets were found. In its first year, there were 700. They ranged in size from half as big as our Earth to several times the size of Jupiter. Some were our vision of hell, churning oceans of molten rock and mountains of bronze 7 times taller than anything on Earth. Blowtorch worlds with 2 mornings and 2 evenings, landscapes of double rainbows populated by the twisted tall timber of static tornadoes. On the other hand, there were planets small and close enough to their host star to be rocky with liquid water, mile-high mountains, deserts, colourful jungles and quiet utopic wetlands. Astrobiologists were soon to confirm that the universe was alive, that there were planets where evolution had solved the common problems caused by their environment, converging on a solution that had allowed 3 different species to evolve in the same way. A member of the elephant family, a member of the bird family, and a fish had all developed the prickly spines and snout of a hedgehog. A place where the hunters and the hunted had driven evolution, and fierce giant rodents with the armoured shell of a military tank inhabited a world that had endured 20 ice ages in the last 1,000 years. A home to some of the greatest giants of them all, where colossal ice age leviathans swallowed 2 tons of animals a week, and a 30-foot high woolly mammoth stumbles around her kitchen sink hovel. Places where vast valleys and prairies rolled out to the seas and mythical beings were commonplace. A land with a total of 3 million new species of insects and animals, each endowed with reason, and enough of them to repopulate every extinct creature on Earth. Now, the western equus, Noah's fabled waterhorse, lives in the land where Jonah's land whale grazes on airborne particle matter. Fan-like plants collect infrared light by spinning like whirling umbrellas. Yellow phosphorescent fish with a sting that would really spoil your holiday swim in a fusion of psychedelic colours. Green reptiles and mysterious golden amphibians love with more passion and tenderness than any mammal. and they each have their own startling pasts, tales of triumph and disaster, and explode gloriously in bustling colonies, and they harmonise all together in cold blood. Each new planet that Pax discovered had its own unique mix of fauna and flora, its own fingerprint, its own DNA. The scientists continued to explore with increasing forensic scrutiny. Landing parties discovered towering walls and spires, and the ruins abandoned by ancient civilizations. And just when we thought they couldn't find anything more incredible, they blew our mind. Pax had discovered over 100 billion exoplanets. The scientists calculated that there are 1 million planets whose inhabitants were light years ahead of us, where they shifted shape and travelled around from dimension to dimension using the second power of quadratics. There were 1 million or so planets that were light years behind us, whose tribes still lived in the Dark Ages and played with fire while trying to work out how far their next invention, the wheel, might take them. There was a whole galaxy of planets that were at various stages of evolution, whose inhabitants were looking back at us whilst making the same bold statements, stacked to the teeth with mathematical evidence, convinced that somewhere on one of those other planets they all had an exact double, that there was another one of them in the same way that there is another one of you, and an infinite number of variations of them and you. Strange to say, as statistics will have it, on these other planets, anything that could possibly happen to your other you will happen. It's perfectly true that on another planet right now, there's another you, who's probably a rock and roll star, and leans back pressing gas through the winding lanes of a private island, whilst listening to their own songs power played on the radio, with the tints fully closed, because the paparazzi won't leave them alone. Okay, I'm clicking my fingers for you to wake up now, because in the neighbouring galaxy, your other you's music career didn't take off. They hit the bottle and would sing on street corners for metal money. It's all very sad. I should mention in passing that I was that guy, you know, the one who'd been drinking from a bottle and was about to sing on a street corner. I ran into a few problems and realised that I needed to make a change, and quickly. I've since found, as with all acts of initiative, there seems to be one elementary truth. The moment we absolutely commit ourselves to change, providence moves too. All sorts of things seem to occur to help you, things that would otherwise have never happened. All sorts of unexplained events and characters seem to turn up just to help things along. Very soon after my fall from grace, unfamiliar civilizations began firing powerful laser messages through their own giant telescopes, just to announce their existence. Fast bursts of signals were being intercepted after a journey of 1,000 light years. Earth began receiving a constant flood of data, signals that were so unambiguously artificial they could only have come from faraway worlds. Communication experts, more used to working on the intelligence of chimpanzees and dolphins, began trying to devise ways of decoding the messages to frame some kind of response. Others believed that a new level of code breaking was required, as the standard decipherment techniques didn't seem to be helping much. The government put things into context by announcing that they still had extraterrestrial scripts and signals from antiquity that had remained undeciphered over hundreds of years. Still they came, quick, bright flashes that lasted just milliseconds, but gave out as much energy as our sun in a single day. The Pax team became very interested in one particular planetary system. This was similar in scale to our solar system and orbited the star HD 162826, 100 light years from Earth in the constellation of Hercules, a star born from the same cloud of gas as our own sun. It was noted that the first planet of the star was similar in appearance to our own Jupiter, being only slightly smaller and completing its eccentric orbit every 420 days. The project scientists had to double-check that what they were seeing was actually true. The big telescope blinked. Ground control ran a check on its coordinates and slewed Pax's beady eye back in the planet's direction. All confirmed that the planet did indeed have liquid water on board. It certainly did. It had life in the sea, sky and on land. It had a hot side where the heat rose and a dark side where the heat sank back into the cold. A permanent wind system, a stable atmosphere, a climate, the type of weather you could forecast. This little purple dot was in the region of 2 red dwarfs, so it was never quite sunset there. Every hour was a cocktail hour, a good spot for real estate, or so I thought, because when I looked closely, its formation of continents mirrored almost exactly that of our own. The hazy images of the planet sent back by Pax brought me right back to myself, and I found that once I made a start on trying to take the first steps on a journey to get there, the universe took her own steps to help me. And if you're prepared to listen, I'll explain how. But first, I think it's only fair that you should know a little bit more about me and the circumstances under which I became interested in the most recent news reports about the perfect getaway. Take a walk along Garland Beach Terrace where I used to live, and it soon becomes clear that once the owners have made a statement of wealth to those back home, most of them disappear. For reasons that I'll go into later, I had to dislocate myself from the place before I was torn apart limb by limb. To start the ball rolling, the bailiffs and my girlfriend had begun emptying the apartment of all of its contents. Soon after that, thick metal grills were fixed over the windows and it was put up for sale on behalf of the receiver. While the inseparable trouble of living with the thought of dying came creeping into my world, I busied myself trying to find the significant amount of cash that I owed to some rather unsavoury characters. I should tell you about me. My name is Sol. Ma would tell everyone that she'd named me that way because I was conceived at the Hotel Solimar Benidorm. I was lucky, really. It might well have been Vino Tinto or San Miguel. According to her, I was always a bit too bright for my own buttons. She joked that when I was born and the midwife slapped me on the arse, I didn't cry because I was too busy rearranging the room. When new girlfriends came to meet the family, the standing joke was that when I was a kid, I used to show her around, as I seemed to have this heightened memory when it came to directions and the places I'd been. She would tell everyone that even at a young age, I would give her directions on how to get to my clinic from the back seat of the family car, to her great relief, since she didn't want to be late for my appointment with the child psychologist. I was falsely accused of cheating at school because my examination answers would often include perfect and lengthy reproductions of the principal text for the courses. Dear Mother, whom my father affectionately called the Mad One, insisted that they considered foregoing the consultations and instead relaunching me as Joe 90. You might remember him as the puppet that came complete with a set of transparent strings that seemed to be worked by somebody from above. He was a lot like Pinocchio, insofar as everything seemed fairly normal until he drifted off into wildly flowery scenes that were beyond belief. The only real difference between the two is that Joe's missions were vastly more complex than Pinocchio's and involved some really tasty characters, and, since he was a proper spy, a briefcase full of elaborate gadgets. Before he went on one of these missions, he would step inside the rat trap, an orb that would slowly start to rotate, immersing him in a sphere of sensory input. Inside a few minutes, the transformation from boy to spy would be complete, and off he went, into the morning sun clutching his little briefcase. As she sloshed from room to room with her breakfast glass of gin, seemingly unaffected, Mother would point to the television. "That's you," she would say. "That's you, that is." It was when the old man left home that I really started collecting. I kept a drawer full of gadgets. My favourite one was the secret spy scope. I found the clip-out advert in the back of a Spider-Man comic. It sort of leapt off the page with the claims that the designers made about the thing. Using the scope, you'll see up to 7 miles away without being seen. I couldn't believe my eyes. This piece of top-secret military equipment was available to the general public. An amazing mini-scope, less than 5 inches long, precision-made from durable aircraft alloy that fitted in your pocket like a pen, and weighed less than 2 ounces. And yet, hidden deep within the gubbins of this little marvel was a series of finely engineered optical lenses, so powerful they could pull in all of nature's wonders in a second. Mountains, valleys and village hamlets that'd be so close you'd almost believe you could reach out and touch them. There was more. Horse racing would be more exciting with the spy scope. You could focus on the finish line, know the winner before it was announced, observe wildlife at such distances that animals and birds wouldn't be able to see you or even catch your scent. Imagine that, I thought. Everywhere I went there'd be an opportunity to people watch. With a scope in your pocket, you'd have the touchline view on sport in an instant. Visits to the boating, the motor racing, cricket, tennis, football, boxing and rugby all came with the same guarantee. You would never miss the inside play again. Just as I was about to turn the page, the spin got heavier. The long-range lens in this fine instrument makes it ideal for police, detective or spy operations. The sensational pulling power lets you observe all kinds of suspicious activity at great distances. And finally, the killer blow that had me turn off the coupon for the free 90-day home trial was the special feature. Did you know that the spy scope is 2 instruments in one? Yep. First of all, it's a handy yet powerful microscope that we call the mighty midget microscope. Why? Because it gives you times 24 power magnification. For instance, when you study a tiny insect through the microscope, it changes into a fearsome monster. Sold to the boy in the yellow turtleneck jumper, the spy scope arrived, and I began to look at my tiny universe in a different light. The other thing I collected was autographs. I used to copy them in fountain pen, create new ones for my own name, then put them all in order. I sometimes felt that I was living my life through the stars of television, and there were very many. I loved my set of vintage signatures. I kept them in books and had codes on the side, and was always checking to make sure they were safe, or putting them somewhere even safer. In a way, I think I was making order out of the chaos in my mind by exploring the concept of consistency. I would read the names by running a finger over the swirls and around the O's and across the T's, counting the number of different variations on a particular letter, or marvelling at the rarity of my Shakespeare on a snippet of yellow-stained parchment. It may have seemed to others like my world was upside down, but I saw it as getting a handle on things. The constant changes in my tiny world never seemed to give me a chance to prepare, and I think that it was because of this that I found pleasure and comfort in doing the same things over and over again. I found myself imposing routines and rituals in my daily life to help determine elusive patterns. It was the routines and rituals that made my life predictable, imposed order. Chaos or uncertainty just caused me confusion and paranoia. A large part of my life was spent just trying to work out the pattern and code behind everything. My development of language relied less on conversation with family and friends, and more on what was being absorbed from television programs and films. Since I watched a lot of films that featured English actors, I would pronounce my words using the accent of the first person I heard pronounce that particular word, and so, as a result of this, grew up speaking with a plummy English accent, which sounded totally conspicuous in a family of village Catholics who lived in the south of Ireland. They called me the double agent, or the spy who blew in from the cold. As a result, I switched off and became more aware of the electricity that goes on between people. I noticed that when several people got together and were having a good time, their speech and laughter seemed to follow a rhythm. They would all laugh together and then talk quietly until the next laughing session. Although I couldn't always get the gist of a conversation, I could follow the rhythm, pace and melody, and found that I could join in by training myself to laugh at the right time, which was useful at Catholic Church because it was so weird. The intimate relationship between some of the other boys and their confessors was at best a recipe for inappropriate encounters. At worst, it held the potential to become a paedophile's paradise. Instructions for the sacrament began at age 5. The early confessions and the ideas they put into my head were oppressive. I was taught that sins which broke the 10 Commandments or the Church's rule were mortal. In other words, these sins were poison for the soul and earned punishment in the eternal fires of hell. Unless, of course, they were forgiven in the dark box. What sins could I possibly have committed to deserve hell for all eternity? All sorts of things popped into my mind. Was the devil really short, fat and red with a pointy tail? Many of the mortal sins were to do with breaking the Church's rules, such as being late for Mass on Sunday or missing Mass or breaking the Holy Communion fast. The fast meant that you couldn't eat a crumb or drink even a minuscule drop of water from midnight the night before going to Holy Communion. We would all agonise over whether we had swallowed a trace of toothpaste or bitten a fingernail. I went trotting around to my first communion in a dreamlike state, but when I joyfully looked up to the heavens, I accidentally swallowed a drop of water. I was mortified when I realised that I'd broken the sacred fast. I went to communion all the same, and thereafter believed that I was damned forever. Above all, there were those mortal sins of impurity, in thought, word and deed. The nuns taught us that touching ourselves or having a naughty thought was impure. I remember wondering whether I'd committed a mortal sin because I caught a glimpse of a girl's knickers as she high-kicked an Irish jig in front of the class. A priest who I looked upon as a father figure began asking me indecent questions about my sexual thoughts, with a prurient obsession with the mortal sin of masturbation. Ma reached a knocking point and sent him a hand-painted picture of Christ appearing to Mary Magdalene with a note attached, "Nolly me tangier." Still, it was too little too late. I'd been taken by the church with a few splashes of water and a dozen meaningless words. It was a shame, really, because such was the determination of Ma's religiously trained mind, that another pair of splashes is all that it would have taken for her to reverse the process. Anyway, at my first confession he asked me to take off my clothes, and then went to kiss me on the lips while trying to touch Mr. Winkleman. A few years later, I went back into the dark box that had scared me so much. I went in the priest's side when no one was around, and checked through the curtains to try and find out if there was anything going on behind it all. They say that many advances in art and science have been achieved by alternative conceptualizations, notions that appear to transcend linguistic thought. Of course, the family noticed it first. I would disappear inside my thoughts for minutes, hours, and then days would pass me by, while I thought things through frame by frame. To me, language seemed to be a cage for my thoughts. My personality disorder gave me another perspective on the world. It's certainly the reason for the visions. For as long as I can remember, I've been able to make detailed drawings of people and places from memory. I've always found it easier to think in abstract terms. I could solve a Rubik's Cube inside 2 minutes, and remember the correct order of a pack of playing cards after they were cut, restacked and dealt out. I will build a story around each character, send them shopping for hearts and diamonds, with the numbers being the local currency. I thought that everybody could do it. Situations that piqued my attention received sustained levels of interest. Long periods of impulsivity would often result. The downside of all this is that I often continue using incorrect strategies, which means that I'm less likely than most people to learn from my mistakes, even when it's clear that my strategies aren't working. This might be used to explain why I've made the almighty mistakes I've made. They say that people with a personality disorder should try to adopt the persona of a socially able person. I was encouraged by my therapist to play with action figures, usually masculine heroes, Action Man, Superman or Spider-Man. I had all of those, but rather than have them play macho games, I was told to give them everyday personalities and try to have them play out mundane daily routines. Ma was advised to buy me books on any special interests that I might have. Mine were trains, travel and adventure, so I got books such as The Railway Children and Mr. Ben. After being locked in my bedroom for days on end with my new books, I developed a technique to cope with the boredom. I would absorb the persona of a socially successful person and then reenact the activities that I made up during those endless days of solitary play. Using my imaginary friends in my room, I would give each of them a role within a play and practice each of those roles over and over again to achieve confidence, before attempting to include them in real-life situations. Using this method, I could take part in a different dimension as an observer. When I ventured outside, I became an avid observer. I soon got into graffiti by seeing it everywhere I went. There was this guy who sprayed a huge clown like a badass character from a comic book. He wrote a message underneath it that stayed in my mind. If you really want to know me, I made this picture, the most honest and autobiographical lick I ever did. I call it The Clown. You couldn't turn a corner without seeing Clown's tag. I first met him at a graffiti party. I was 14, maybe 15 years old. He helped bring me up in a way. He was grown up to me, a 20-year-old dude driving around London doing burns all over the place. He was earning a living doing it. I thought about a tag for myself and decided to keep it simple by using my first name, a word that was already out there, a world-famous beer. I thought that was cool in my naive mind. The main advantage was it didn't take long to paint, which was handy if the police were trailing you. I started writing it with luminous silver pens on big cardboard boxes, and then progressed to writing on any smooth surface with a gold chrome pen. I would buy one, lose it, buy another, and then find the last one. Since they were always in my pocket, I kept writing on things like there was a force at work. Clown and me would do trips on the underground and basically live on the carriages for 2 months. We would get an intercity pass, ride the train one day, get off in a city, burn the hell out of it, and then get back on for another couple of hours to the next big city. In 1 week we covered Birmingham, Sheffield, Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool and Glasgow, burning heavy in every train station. We did lots of mad stuff and got chased a lot. When we got caught, we told them we were there for a music concert. They couldn't prove anything. They let us go every time. I always had my story straight with Clown word for word. We had the job fixed. Another time we climbed an office block and did a letter on each floor. The moment after we dropped back down, 2 security guards appeared. Suddenly, they were standing either side of us asking, "So, what are you actually doing here?" We dropped straight into the little boy lost routine. They were like, "This is a really rough area. You've got to get out of here." They were concerned about us. We were right in the middle of Brixton. If they'd have known what we were up to, they would have probably beaten the crap out of us. We would cruise through every London suburb with our shaved heads, tagging in front of people. Nobody ever bothered us. Most of the people who rode the tube at night were freaks and weirdos anyway. Not the kind of bods they'd let on a plane, that's for sure. When Clown and me went on another trip, I remember getting a sweaty handjob at the back of the carriage by this girl. It just kind of came about. She was quite a bit older than me, and I won't lie, a little bit ugly. Lucky it's kind of a blur now. We always carried a pocket full of Whopper vouchers between us, I remember that. Splashed them around like Monopoly money, faking more of them on a colour copy if they got low, mass producing them and living on fast food for the whole tour. When we stopped in Brighton, I won a wad of money on a slot machine. That kept us going in aerosol for another week. While we're on the seafront, painting a wave breaker in broad daylight, doing Led Zeppelin balloons, just farting around, these 2 New York cops wearing handlebar moustaches and sunglasses claimed they were going to make an arrest, until they began admiring the work, saying how they hadn't listened to any Led Zepp in years and boosting us to carry on. I was with Clown when he died. He began drooling on himself and then fell on the floor and had a seizure. It was epilepsy. We were in a shop and they'd just begun to throw us out, thinking Clown was a junkie. The security man was shouting, throw it, I saw him pass it to you," he said, pointing at me. The shopkeeper had a metal cosh and began to swing it at me. I tried to get him off Clown. He lashed out but was slightly wide with his swing and chipped the bone in my elbow. If I hadn't been carrying a couple of aerosols, he probably would have broken a couple of ribs with his second swing. By the time I got back to Clown, it was too late. He was gone. An ambulance took him away, and that was the last I saw of him. I'd always been enthralled by the nuances of Clown's actions, the way he carried himself, even the way he jumped over walls. In fact, I felt it my duty to become him, to live life for him in a way. I consciously set out to do it, and then it just turned into something I did all the time. I wrote a poem for him, Gone Too Soon, for the passing of a clown. You were born to amuse and inspire, a madman with life's delight in his eyes, and then like the morning sun before noon, dimmed by the passing of a cloud, you were gone too soon. By then, I could be more or less who I wanted to be. I'd developed an uncanny ability to copy accents and tone of voice, tiny gestures and mannerisms, a hand movement. A person's walk came naturally, even the facial expressions. My psychologist had told me that capturing the essence and charisma of a person was a characteristic of the condition. Becoming an expert mimic had its advantages. I became popular at school for imitating the voice and mannerisms of characters off the television. I'd apply them to everyday situations and determine who'd be the most successful in a particular situation. Inhabit someone's persona by copying the words and body posture of someone from a TV show into real life. I'd reenact a scene in the real world using the dialogue from one of the headmaster's weekly sermons. and the body language of a film star. I got out of detention one day by convincing the teacher that I was being operated on a brain tumour by phoning him and putting on my best Dr. Kildare accent. My mother had to field a call from a concerned headmaster the following morning. There are, of course, some disadvantages to this. The first is observing and imitating popular but notorious characters, such as the school teen wolves. Initially, this group may accept you as a person who wears their gang colours or speaks their street language. In other words, I walk the walk and I talk the talk. But this in turn would alienate me from normal people, and, if you're talking into a mirror, practising the school bully's intimidation technique in full view of the school bully and his entourage, you will immediately be discovered as a pretender, and a series of beatings will ensue, as they did. At university, I went to the art class, and Mrs. Brooks, the mature female teacher, offered me cigarettes from a gold case, said I had a sexy and raw look about me, and that she wanted me to pose for the life study drawing classes that were held in the gallery. She started a petition saying that more boys were interested in joining the class as a result of her efforts. I declined the proposal. I was more interested in the contemporary film club that screened foreign films ordered from places like Janus in New York, and the Swedish arty films like Wild Strawberries, or French films with a little nudity like Vogue of Vadimes and God Created Women. I took up painting after stealing a set of brushes and paints from her supply cupboard, executing several primitive self-portraits in which my face was a contorted rictus of demented mirth, topped with a crown. I worked at this obsessively for weeks. My girlfriend asked me why. You can't make love all the time, I remember telling her. It saps your energy. I became a person who could disappear easily. I maintained a series of bolt holes where I could hide from conflict, stash myself away from responsibilities and the girlfriend. At the times when she got really heavy, I longed to be somebody else, move to Norway, live in a log cabin as whoever I was being that week, be totally socially savvy, alone, and in the luxury of a real friend. They say that some men with my kind of disorder recognise that women are naturally socially intuitive, and the actions and activities of women seem more exciting to them, and so, to acquire social abilities, they begin to imitate women. I'd like to point out that I didn't go that far. When people with a condition have used imitation to achieve social competence, they can have considerable difficulty convincing people they have a real problem. They become too plausible in their role to be believed by an analyst. Eventually, I found it virtually impossible to talk to people in a normal voice. I always wanted to be the living, breathing incantation of the person to my left. I would combine all of the acquired mannerisms of, say, an MI5 agent, put on a strong English accent, learn the skills of a world-class poker player, and make up a history and identity for myself to go with it. Obviously, the better part of the self-discipline was to first convince myself that I was this new character, and I would keep this up constantly for 6 months at a time, then run several characters at the same time, before taking them all out on the road. When family and friends got worried about my state of mind, I always told them the truth brazenly, but I also told long, fantastic stories to get myself through life's double doors, only to find I then had to construct even more fantastic confabulations to get myself back out, usually through the fire escape. The symptoms became more conspicuous in times of stress and change, and would often precipitate a crisis. If I could change myself and get rid of just the fragments of the disorder, I honestly don't think that I would, because in doing so, I'm sure that I'd lose part of my soul. When I first left university, it was winter, and I began working in an abattoir. It wasn't a job I enjoyed. The best part about it was the 6 a.m. yomp along lonely streets with little time to think about the carnage ahead. I was always between jobs, caught in a riptide of surf, but content to go with whatever current was the strongest. I was impatient and often euphorically excited for no real reason, gripped with the idea that at any moment the great lottery finger would appear through the clouds, that some calling would make itself visible and my life would change for the better. But you can't have faith without doubt. For me, they've always been inseparable. As my friends moved on to the football clubs where I'd failed to attend a trial, or graduated from acting schools I'd been expelled from, dread and fear set in. I'd missed the boat, been too vain thinking that natural-born talent didn't require an instruction manual, and that I could easily fly the nest straight to planet Krypton. I could squander every opportunity given to me to learn and improve and somehow walk off into the sunset with the prom queen to enjoy the good life with Tony Bennett and a full jazz orchestra. A calmer chameleon riding a loose cannon on the roller coaster of life. Trying to enjoy the ecstatic hopes of being young, gifted and broke, and taking a long walk down a short pier into a sea of gloom. At least it was moving forward. Even treading water without a life jacket seemed like an adventure, and sometimes the feeling of being alone kept me going. I managed to get an interview at a whiskey bar with an Irishman named O'Keefe, but eventually secured a job at the transoceanic meat processing plant at Smithfield Market. I got a lift from a friend who worked nearby. The company imported meat and exotic fish from all over the world. Everyone had to wear a yellow hard hat, white overalls and green Wellington boots. Once I got through the initiation ceremony, I got to wear the belt and the aluminium box of knives. Before too long, I was up to my elbows in scales and entrails. I always pushed it to the edge of the limit with the other butchers, just for the hell of it, throwing kilo lumps of chilled beef fat at them and generally behaving like an idiot. One day I threw a frozen rabbit. It missed the young dilatory porter I was aiming for, hit a particularly nasty butcher who went by the name of Scarlet. I was held inside a house-sized freezer with a boning knife pressed to my throat until I crumbled. "So what have you got to say now, laddie?" Scarlet screamed at me through his rotten teeth. "Nothing," I yelped, and followed through, by adding that I would never interrupt the governor while he was making a point. Then, holding my breath, wonder if I'd actually soiled myself. It was on my cigarette break at Smithfield that I began taking an interest in the news. Looking up at the screens, I watched a show that questioned the evidence against the Pac's rendezvous landings. A team of experts were suggesting that the craft didn't land at all, that it merely orbited the candidate planet for 7 days, and on the 8th drifted back out into deep space. They claimed that it was all filmed in a studio, that the Martian landscape is still there, and that the surface craters and red trees were really the Rocky Mountains of the United States. I watched intently as a man in thick black-rimmed glasses pointed out that there was no blast crater on the landing video. All the angles were wrong, and the magnetic storms and mega radiation would have vaporized the craft anyway. One person in the audience blurted out, "You just can't defy the gods and all their laws." "If you can't make it, fake it," was the show's tagline. I am no poet, but if you think for yourself as I proceed, the facts will form a poem in your mind. Michael Faraday, scientist, 1791 to 1897. It was O'Keefe who introduced me to the professor who owned Bodycore over on Argyle Street. His tagline was, "Don't expect forever, prepare for it." This is the place that I went to work after Kester decided it was time for my free transfer. Although London is one of the most modern financial and business centres in the world, medieval customs are apparent everywhere. The Bank of England's Old Lady of Threadneedle Street holds on to her gold and her image, while some messengers still wear the pink waistcoats and top hats as they go about their time-honoured business. The 5 wise men of Rothschilds still set the world price for bullion in the gold room on St Swithin's Lane at 10:30 each morning, and the gentlemen from the Fishmongers' Guild, their boots silvered with fish scales, still exercise their traditions down by the river at Billingsgate. I'm sure that my early bird friends will be forever looking skyward whilst hooking carcasses back at Smithfield. But before they all rise, at Bartholomew's, London's first hospital, the nurses begin to prepare patients for the professor's morning surgery. In the mid-18th century, the Freemasons colonised London's Argyle Street. Egypt House had more recently become a mortuary and paid homage to the region's heritage with a dead centre that, for commercial reasons, had been styled like a Masonic temple of the sun. It might have been an old-fashioned building, but it wasn't lost in time. It seemed to run 2 clocks, one which for the past 1,000 years had been going so slowly the hands had picked up the ceremonial dust of the centuries, whilst the other operated with the impeccable efficiency of an atomic clock. I suppose the place was quite pleasant, if you could ignore the weeping clientele and the chilly interns. It seemed that working with a blade was qualification enough to work there, so I gave up my hard hat and knives for a different set of sharps. Bodycore had similar sized walk-in freezers and fridges to the meat company, the same procession of forklift trucks bleeping the same "this vehicle is reversing" message as they weaved in and out of the chilled racks and shelves. At this establishment, they were also in the business of flesh, but it wasn't bovine or piscine. I was being pitched into the delicate business of human preservation, with a legendary pathologist, Professor von Klapp, a man who was known for having his tailored white coats patched and darned rather than thrown away. The one he wore on the day of my interview showed clear signs of a rough running stitch across the elbow. In my mind, there was something of the genius about the nut, so I decided to accept the job offer. It wasn't what I wanted to do in my life, but I soon discovered that I could spend a year in body corps and never be bored. Von Klapp carried out an initial brief of what would be expected of me. He invited me for tea in his office, and I sat gawping at his blood-sprayed white coat while he finished off some paperwork surrounded by a self-indulgence of oddities. On one part of the wall were his certificates that included his Middle Temple examination pass. On the other wall, there was a huge stone tablet with a carving of a pyramid topped with an all-seeing eye. The stone had a brass plaque underneath, with an inscription dedicated to the righteous ones of the blazing rockets, the eye in the sky, the temple of the sun, and the law of three. There were specimen jars in which floated all manner of the grotesque, a gallstone the size of Marble Arch, conjoined twin babies, something that looked like a ruptured brain, a human hand with 6 fingers, and a large liver cancer. In fact, the only specimen that was still alive was a black Labrador named Anastasia, who farted a lot and wandered around the long hallways with no real destination. None of these things seemed to put Von Klapp off his sandwich. In a self-dramatised way, he trimmed the excess fat off his hand with a scalpel and discarded it to the bin with a shrug and a gasp. Body Corps provided a worldwide service with a difference. Chilled bodies would arrive in caskets and black rubber zipper bags by air shuttle from around the globe. It was fascinating for me, but the girl I was dating was confused. Why did I prefer to spend any spare time out with the corpses? "There's definitely something odd about you," she would say. She had a perfectly fair point. It was an unhealthy absorption, I must admit. I had to rehearse my lines to keep her in tow, explaining how I found my work fascinating, that we're providing a genuinely worthwhile service that helped people cope with bereavement in a new and innovative way. It took a while to get used to the night shift at first. As soon as the caretaker turned off the lights, I would snatch up my sketch pad, fly up 3 flights of stairs, and make a bolt for the exit. I had very little money at the time, so work had to be a priority. If I were being completely honest, I would rather spend the evening in the mortuary than with a ditzy young girl who was frightened of spiders and expected popcorn-eyes visits to the cinema every Friday night. And the corpses had such captivating life stories and hopes and dreams unfulfilled. All sorts came through the double doors and onto the tables. The road traffic accident victims, the baby who died of unknown causes, the middle-aged woman who was sent to us by a mournful husband after being run through by a sword, the sword wielded by a deranged son who had become the victim of an accidental drug overdose, a result of taking too much of a conceptual medicine, which the manufacturers claimed delivered a virtual reality sex experience, set to a rich musical tapestry that borrows heavily from LSD. Every day there was a whole new raft of talent coming through the double doors. The businessman who came home to find his wife in bed with his brother and jumped off Tower Bridge. The crimes of passion and the suicides, we got them all to prepare, even the odd murder mystery. At precisely 02:14 a.m. on New Year's Day morning, a gurney burst through those notorious rubber doors. It was the Greek Cypriot shipping tycoon, Stavros Konstantinos, shot dead with 7 silver bullets on Christmas Day. His killer was never found. Next came the soldier killed in battle. What a shame. Such a handsome young man, who appeared to be fast asleep. It was a fatal lung bleed that had killed him, the shock from a roadside incendiary device, and his assassin, the bombstress, who'd missed her escape queue, taken out by a sniper. When automatic and immediate death sentences were introduced for terrorists, Body Corps began to receive the corpses that were claimed for use in British medical science. It was by pure chance that these 2 bodies had rocked up together. I was stopped dead in my tracks by the sight of a beauty dressed from head to toe in black, lying on a tin table, looking for the entire world like a misunited Arab Emirates. So dangerously appealing. Under normal circumstances, she could have reduced any man to his most deeply stupid state of boyishness. There I stood, with a daisy-chain brain and a cherry-drop heart, while between her delicate butterscotch fingers, a single white rose. Von Klapp interrupted my daydream with his take on it all. I don't know of any other community on earth where brother must be on his guard against sister. Ape woman should not kill ape man, he went on. My young assistant was a guy called Franz Camp. He was diminutive in stature, so it came as quite a shock when I turned to put a reasonable question to him, and he suddenly grown to 6'7". He was standing behind a male corpse that was being held fully upright by a Franz Camp, who appeared to have been gripped by some sudden bout of superhuman strength. Having screwed a cigarette in the cadaver's mouth, steaming drunk, he began working it like a ventriloquist dummy. I know that I should have put on the brakes sooner. I know that I could have. I know that I should have, but alas, I did not. He was directing the apology to the female corpse lying on the gurney next to him. Oh, my poor princess, with that broken smile. I did not notice those red streaks in your hair. Now that we are both single again, would you like to join me for a weekend in Paris? After a while, I gave up my protests against France and his bucolic pantomimes. I came to accept his deadpan routines as part of the living. Whilst the elaborate ceremonial magic of embalming is not necessarily evil, there arose from its perversion a morass of ideas which completely undermined and corrupted my morals. Seizing the reins of my soul by demanding my complete and unhesitating attention. With eyeballs fixed and pupils dilated, I was completely hooked. How the corpses talked to me, their haircuts, the cosmetics, and the clothes they were wearing during their final moments, the ways in which they died, each one a bitter symphony. With all the news about the trees running out, instead of spending money on collecting antique furniture, affluent people began wanting to keep their loved ones at home. After being diagnosed with incurable disease, the enraged media tycoon Giles Bunker wrote to Von Klapp from hospital. Filling at a loose end, he'd taken a notepad from the nurse's station and began scratching out his request. There's still so much I have to do, he said. If you could let me stay the age I am, I'd give everything I've got, everything I'll ever have. 12 months later, he looked like a page boy in a Perspex case in a window on Fleet Street. It became quite a trend. I always thought it was by some miracle Professor Von Klapp hadn't been consigned to some death camp himself. He'd escaped the Austrian authorities that were under pressure from the Vatican to hand him over and fled to England, along with a set of Renaissance surgical instruments. It was there in London that he put in his claim for diplomatic immunity. He loved it, kept his tools in the Louis XIV set of drawers. It sat on an Aztec rug in his office surrounded by some old weapons, a few oil paintings, and a collection of Carl Fabergé eggs in a glass dome. All collected during his expeditions to different parts of the world, each item a tiny work of art in itself, and a feast for hungry eyes like mine. At the top of an endless flight of stairs was the arena where some of Von Klapp's most famous autopsies were filmed. I enjoyed sitting there, under the spotlights, sipping coffee at the Chippendale cabinet, talking cheerily as the lights cast a pink glow over the zinc drainers. A flock of white doves would regularly wing their way through the indigo skies over the place. At one sunrise, as one straggler made its way over the wall from next door's garden, it came astray, flying right in through a window and onto a flat body. Along with it came a cloud of gnats and a burst of freshly cut lavender from the surrounding roof gardens. When the mortality figures from the war went up to 5,000 a month, the main topic of conversation among grieving wives was how they might afford Von Klapp's services so they could have their loved ones home again. He was fast becoming the world's most popular medical figure, and after his bookkeeper, Dr. Margot Bedswell, had discovered a key component for the treatment of cancer, Bodycall was really on the map. The place was so busy he always looked exhausted. He often looked straight through me whilst he was performing, as though he couldn't be bothered, like I wasn't really there, as though what he was doing was a magical catalyst for something much bigger. He would come to work early in the morning, go into the refrigerator, and there he would stay, from sunrise until darkness, without eating or drinking, never laying down his syringe, continuing to inject until the very last fold of skin was steeped in his balmy mixture. Days would pass without him touching a body. Other days he would spend several hours just looking over one, contemplating his complicated stitch-ups into a dictaphone. His vigorous approach to embalming involved standing over the body and moving from syringe to syringe. When he got to the appropriate spot, he would squeeze warm fluid down each tube, doing a kind of ritual dance as he went along. The physicality of this approach prompted one critic to describe his style as action embalming, whilst others took it as proof that the process was as significant as the end product. He always worked methodically from top to toe, arranging the limbs in a variety of poses before finally settling on the most suitable swan song for the corpse. Then he would take an insulin syringe and give a few finishing touches. I remember he once dressed the dead members of a pop group from a jet plane accident in the style of ancient Greek deities, with flowing white silks and gold olive branch braids in the hair. Having wheeled them off into the showroom to dry, he suddenly breezed off somewhere else. I didn't see him for days. In that almost pedantically accurate English, with a wide slice of his native tongue, he would return to talk to them. "All the pressure is off now, my beautiful children. I will bring about the very best in you all." I have to say, it was a pleasure working with a great man. He always worked with care and integrity, and was such a philosophical person. I would only have to ask him one simple open-ended question, and it was like turning on a tap. There was this outpouring of human consciousness that was torrential. I once asked him if he considered what he did to be art or science. "I am both artist and scientist. The great Picasso once said that pictures are more important than furniture. I believe that people are more important than furniture. And now you can take the dearly departed home. Sit them in your living room if you wish. Bring to me your children, your husband, wife or lover, and I will suspend them forever in time with my patented plastification process." Von Klapp would dig a metal pipe into his latest muse and begin slurping and tugging and sucking. "You see, we drain all the bile, body fluids from the cadaver, and we replace with our universal liquid isocyanate resin mixture. And then you get a perfectly preserved treasure that you can keep for all time." "You know, a lot of people find this controversial," I said to him. He just fixed me with a freezing stare and said something quite chilling. "You see, the ever after is all that I'm after." Dr. Blunt was the professor's chief assistant, and since it was his job to mix the liquid resin that was pumped into the customers, we gave him the nickname Mr. Plasto. With a mop of thick grey hair that was scooped up on top of his head like a cottage loaf, and a fleshy red alcoholic's nose, he looked as though he'd recently acknowledged a death dose of radiation. On the top of the hair was a green surgeon's cap, but he never wore any rubber gloves. He said that he preferred to feel his cold tool against the warmth of his hand. We worked a long shift from 6 until 4, contemplating 3 treatments a shift most days, me following him around the table, handing him hair tools, his favourite scalpel, saw, suction tube and camera line. I would carefully place items such as jewellery, gold teeth and hearing aids in a clear plastic snappy bag, and label them to ensure that they were returned to loved ones while he cleared out the orifices of the patient singing his song. "On the day that you were born, the angels got together and decided to create a dream come true. So they sprinkled stardust in your hair and..." He would always check the colour of the patient's eyes and then change the last word accordingly. "And moon dust in those eyes of blue." Most of the time, I seemed to find myself watching Plasto's fishy eyes blinking back at me through a magnifying glass the size of a turkey plate. When he did come out from behind the lens, his unrelenting standards would run him fractious, especially if he couldn't find his soap. Mrs. Plasto had complained about the stench he brought home every night and accused him of necrophilia, a suspicion that he tried to refute as being absurdly wrong morally, wrong scientifically, and finally, he rounded it all up as hurtful claptrap. Nonetheless, Plasto carried on seeing to the dead, while I was popped off to Fraser's on Clyde Street to buy a bar of carbolic soap. When he finished, he would roll up his sleeves and scrub up to his elbows before disappearing off to buy his wife flowers. When I asked Von Klapp where he learned his trade, he became a little sentimental. It was at the School of Medicine in Austria. My teacher was the eminent Dr. Mengele, such a beautiful and complex man, so fragile like a Greek word made of porcelain. I was sure that if he were to fall over, he would shatter into 1,000,000 tiny pieces. I also read. I liked antique books, I liked the pages, I liked to breathe them in. As he talked, he reached towards the wall and pressed a chrome disc that operated the door to a glass case. It opened to reveal a thick red book with a group of elemental signs on the front cover and letters that were embossed in gold. As he began to venture into the complexities of his favourite authors, there was something that I noticed twitching. It was his eyebrows, so well shaped and tousled they would have caused Salvador Dali to set down his brushes and tear off his own shirt sleeves. I had not known the full potency of peripatetic eyebrows until I'd been at one with the Von Klapp eyebrows. They were eyebrows that should have come with their own set of designer scorecards. In spite of all the training and grooming, they were as mobile as a Randy Milkman. On some days, they could be seen perching almost nonchalantly behind his ears like recently shaved pencils, while at other times they could be spotted as far south as his cheeks, just lapping around. I learned to read them like a book. When they weren't being secretive, hiding in the creases of his sleeve-polished forehead, as though recently separated and trying to work things out for the sake of the kids, they whispered and reasoned with each other. If you caught them by surprise by turning on the light, they would do a slow circulating pirouette, or a door might slam, and they would both stand to attention. I heard that one night, whilst Von Klapp was sleeping, they had to fight off a lost spider that had dared to wander onto his precious forehead. The spider put up a lazy, haphazard fight, but in the end had to walk off sideways, telling itself that nothing had happened. On one particular morning, when he was still half asleep, and dropped the kettle lid into a recently boiled pan of water, and one of Margot's loomers slipped loosely out of its nanny sack, they reached down, totally synchronised, and with one hairy arm apiece gently covered his eyes. They were so into it all, the right brow, being the younger of the two, only came back to roost when the left one tapped out a seductive tango on his taut temple. And while he dabbed away the crowded beads of sweat gathering across his forehead with an embroidered handkerchief, they would wait around, performing more pirouettes as though caught in car headlights. On the tables in front of Von Klapp were the bodies of the young soldier and the young bombstress. "Now let me see, you have these two people, and you can see we start to become aware of what human beings are capable of doing to each other once they abandon dignity. Look at them, they could be lovers in another set of circumstances. Instead," he said, wiping his scalp on a white linen cloth, "they lie next to each other completely dead. And to die for your country, to get into the Natural History Museum, I don't think so. The most terrifying of ideas often start as two opposing forces. Now, I will make them one, with eternity." Von Klapp made a deep incision into the soldier's neck and began inserting a pipe. The lines pulled taut, and Plasto took care of another large uploading of plastic resin. Von Klapp held on to the soldier's head as the resin flowed. As the pressure gauge reached the high 90s, the dead soldier's hand reached out as if to pick an apple from a tree. Von Klapp simply continued with his lecture. "It is important to us to know what truly makes us human. Many years ago, scientists discovered DNA, which carries genes through the generations, determines physical attributes such as hair and eye color, height and skin color. The step in the chain of human understanding was the discovery of the genome. This is the code that drives the brain in all creatures and separates us from our relatives, the other mammals. But what we should ask is how close are we to our nearest cousin, the chimpanzee? We are very similar in construction. We have the same amount of hair on our bodies. One major difference, of course, is that we have a larger brain case and habitually walk upright, the trademark of humanity. But what has actually changed in 6 million years since we shared a common ancestor? And what do we mean when we consider that we have a more complex intellect? Von Klapp continued his performance for the mirrors around the table, steadying pipes, nipping and tucking with his blade. A squirrel has a better memory than us. Can you remember everywhere you leave things? Ask him. He would show you his nuts. An ape is more spatially aware and has far better understanding of what makes things move. They perform better than us at certain tasks. As Von Klapp's voice rose along with the sound of the mounting pressure from the machines, the lamps began to shake. Where we have the advantage is this. We are better at working together for a greater good. And that's what builds civilization, takes colonies out of the primitive. The ability to pool our abilities and create new resources to create tools, to control fire, to build the wheel, to build houses, technology, and the white fire to destroy the very civilization we strive to create. He stared at me intently over the rim of his glasses. We are the only creatures that destroys ourselves so elegantly, so constructively. While remaining totally focused on his presentation, he began cutting into the soldier's brain. The human brain is the most complex and mysterious organ in the known universe. So far, he added, with a wink, rooting around with the scalpel. You see that we can peel away the meninges of the brain like the piece of an orange. You can see the heavy folds of the cerebral cortex. And all of this information packed into such a small space. Von Klapp began cutting deep into the canals of the soldier's brain, suddenly removed it completely, and continued his conversation with it eye to eye. I am fascinated by anatomy, but just what is going on inside your brain? Such a huge organ. Of course, with everything that is expected of us, and everything that is going on in the world, we have far more to learn about being a human than a chimp has to learn about being a chimp. Von Klapp held the brain like a Shakespearean actor playing to the audience. This human brain is a whole world in your hand, the seat of human personality. It's the place where we experience and store our version of the world. 100 billion neurons and 40% more connections than our nearest cousins. 100 trillion connections in every brain. To understand it completely, if we ever could, we would need to begin with a whole new toolkit. He took a razor-sharp brain knife to the organ and continued to write his mark across the morning. There are 3 billion letters and 23 chromosomes that make up the chemical blocks that hold the secret of this lump of tissue. If he printed the entire content, it would take a week to lay out. Our entire life lies in this code. He produced a 3-dimensional image of the brain, which slowly rotated on the screen above us. You can see here a labyrinth of axon-making synapse connections. It's beautiful to look at the brain this way, but difficult for our human brain to understand the complexities of another. The ability to constantly change at a cultural level, that's the genius of being a human. He pointed to the mind map of colours on the screen. Our entire life is contained within this code. The piece of code that sets us apart from chimpanzees is SRGAP2. This only appears in humans. He opened a small red textbook. I will read you the code, and as I read you may notice a subtle change that appears between page 814 and page 824. Listen very carefully. Listen very carefully. Von Klapp began to tear through the pages. C-A-C-A-G-G-A-G-G-C-A-G-G-C-H-A-G-G-C. You see? By far the biggest challenge for the human is to live with a beast within that is determined to live by the laws of the jungle, using extremely powerful drives and instincts to fulfill its own agenda. What do we do? I asked. There's a way to enhance the human code, and this is important because, in the same way that this code separates us from the apes, it separates us from higher intelligence. The trouble is, we are too busy making bombs instead of trying to find the answers. Von Klapp lowered his voice and beckoned me across the table. So listen to me, he said, pointing up through the skylight. There are people who live in the stars, and there's a key that can unlock everyone and everything, so that we are all together in mind, all as one, the whole universe, the super brain soul. Von Klapp stepped away from the treatment table and turned his eyes upwards towards the writer. Excuse me, young man. I said excuse me. Who do you mean? Came the voice from above. I mean you. You're the writer in all of this, and you're controlling all the voices. Well, I'm not really in the story, but how can I help you? You wrote me, didn't you? Yes, I did write you, but to be precise, I'm just copying down your words. Can I ask you a question? Of course you can. Fire away, the voice said. Why did you give me this shitty accent? Shitty accent? How do you mean shitty? This is a shitty, contrived accent. Do you think all of these people listening are stupid? No, of course not. And besides, this is you talking now. It's all your own work. No, it is not. Why not? Because I am not from Bavaria. That is a completely different part of Europe. And I don't talk like that because I am from Austria. Okay, I'll make a note of that on the manuscript. And while you're doing that, what about these eyebrows? Who do you think you are anyway? I notice that you give yourself a normal voice. Where are you from? The Midlands originally. That's halfway between here and Blackpool. Halfway between here and there and Roddy Avery, I suppose. You write me out of this story and give young Sol here some peace. We were all right until you came along. And don't forget about the eyebrows. Okay, I understand. I'll see what I can do. And the eyebrows, you ruddy idiot! Professor Von Klapp was certainly in possession of a rare mind, but at university, no one had suspected he'd been blessed with such mental dexterity. It took periods of self-imposed isolation to transform himself into a genius. What kept him going was the power he discovered through the mastery of certain steps, and the visions that came to him while he worked. Here, look, Saul, he said, rooting and slicing with his knife. Here is the pineal gland, the third eye, the seat of all consciousness. As he prodded deep inside the weeping organ, the gland blinked and bled lines of mucus across the white cloth. He looked up at me across the table and began speaking with increasing enthusiasm until his pupils met on the bridge of his nose. What I am talking about is the single consciousness, the master plan. But of course, every time we get closer to achieving it, we destroy ourselves. I had no idea what he meant. He kept going on about a certain type of wildflower. Ah, yes, he said, sniffing the rancid air around us. We have to rediscover the purple flower, a pinch of the quintessence, a pinch of purple Glendora, to bring everything back together again. But alas, he said benignly, it is extinct. We could never see it here in our lifetime, but maybe, just maybe, it is out there in the universe somewhere. What, in a galaxy far, far away, you mean? Don't be so ruddy clever. So where then? I said, all mixed up. It might be in this ruddy galaxy. He scanned the two bodies lying side by side on the tables and turned to me with his Mona Lisa smile. When all's said and done, Saul, I'm a simple man with modest ambitions. Happy ever afters are all that I'm after. By the time he'd dried out, the soldier looked charming, almost friendly, the frozen stare of complicit sadness uncannily appealing. There was definitely more colour in his cheeks. His assailant looked totally waked from her sleep, fresh, bright, and seemingly not too much the worse for her terrible ordeal. Armed now only with a white rose, she appeared to be whispering to the wall, until Mr. Plaster came and turned her towards the window to attract new customers. What I couldn't figure out straight away was how artificial eyes could twinkle so consistently, until I spotted the manufacturer's box, and the words, implants, tiny motorised prisms which perpetually tracked environmental light sources, and, if inserted correctly, they would project the dearly departed's life story in video onto most flat, non-reflective surfaces. This worked well in theory, except that von Klapp's own eyesight was very poor, which often resulted in the eyes being inserted the wrong way around, and another terrible beauty would be born, with the latest two standing side by side in a showroom window, their eyes positively sparkling. The only thing separating their love from reality was the strong smell of industrial glue, which von Klapp would breathe deeply into his lungs, as though the odour was part of the system of cure. What did it all mean? I was beginning to wonder if my long-time habit of life among the dead had started to tell on my own brain.